The kitchen in a black grandmother's home during the 1960s through 1980s was more than just a place where meals were prepared. It was a laboratory of creativity, a classroom of wisdom, and a monument to resilience. While mainstream cookbooks focused on convenience foods and elaborate recipes, black grandmothers were performing daily miracles, transforming modest ingredients into feasts that fed entire families and sometimes half the neighborhood. These women possessed an almost mystical ability to make something out of nothing, to stretch pennies until they screamed, and to ensure that no one ever left their table hungry. Their kitchens hummed with the wisdom of generations, where every scrap had purpose, every leftover found new life, and every dollar worked overtime. But what were the secrets behind this culinary magic? Here are 25 ways black grandmothers made the impossible possible, turning financial constraints into legendary meals that grandchildren still dream about decades later. 1. Saving and reusing every glass jar. Walk into any black grandmother's kitchen in the 1970s, and you'd find an entire cabinet dedicated to cleaned-out jars from mayonnaise, pickles, jelly, and pasta sauce. These weren't trash. They were valuable storage containers that cost nothing. Grandmothers would soak off-label, scrub jars until they sparkled, and repurpose them for everything from storing leftover bacon grease to organizing dried beans, rice, and sugar. The larger Hellmann's mayonnaise jars became drinking glasses for kids, while smaller jars held homemade preserves, pickled vegetables, or leftover gravy that would be reheated for the next meal. This practice was about more than frugality. It represented a refusal to waste anything that could serve another purpose. While stores sold expensive Tupperware and storage sets, black grandmothers knew that a well-washed jar worked just as well and cost nothing. These jars lined pantry shelves like soldiers, each one filled with something essential, each one representing a small victory against waste. Kids learned early that you never threw away a good jar. That was throwing away money. 2. Buying day-old bread from the bakery. Every few days, many black grandmothers would make a special trip to the local bakery right before closing time, when day-old bread went on sale for a fraction of the regular price. They knew exactly which bakeries marked down their unsold loaves and precisely when to arrive. That slightly stale bread would be transformed into French toast for breakfast, bread pudding for dessert, or breadcrumbs for coating fried chicken or fish. Some grandmothers would lightly toast the bread to refresh it, making it nearly indistinguishable from fresh-baked. This was not about settling for less. It was about seeing opportunity where others saw waste. Bakeries needed to move their day-old products, and smart grandmothers turned their discount into family meals. The practice taught children valuable lessons about timing, negotiation, and the difference between true value and perceived value. A loaf of bread that was perfectly good, but one day older could save 50 cents, and 50 cents could buy milk or eggs for another meal. 3. Making wish sandwiches and crackers last. When the grocery budget ran thin toward the end of the month, black grandmothers became masters of stretching staples. The wish sandwich, 2 pieces of bread with nothing in between where you wish there was meat, was a real thing in some households during particularly tight times. But more commonly, grandmothers would make a small amount of filling go far. 1 can of tuna stretched across 6 sandwiches with extra mayonnaise and pickles, or potted meat spread thin with mustard and sliced onions to create volume and flavor. Saltine crackers became a filling side dish, sometimes crushed into soups to make them more substantial, or spread with a tiny bit of butter and eaten as a snack. Some grandmothers mixed crushed crackers with eggs and a little milk to create more scrambled eggs than the actual egg count would suggest. These techniques were shared quietly among neighbors and friends, passed from one generation to the next, as survival strategies that kept families fed when money simply did not exist. 4. Collecting and rendering every bit of bacon grease. The coffee can sitting on the stove was sacred in a black grandmother's kitchen. Every time bacon was cooked, the hot grease was carefully poured into that can, never wasted down the drain. This golden liquid became the foundation for countless meals. The fat for frying eggs, the base for gravies, the seasoning for green beans, collards, and black-eyed peas. A spoonful of bacon grease could transform a pot of plain cabbage into something rich and satisfying, providing flavor that butter or oil simply could not match. This practice connected directly to West African cooking traditions, where every part of the animal was used and respected. Bacon grease was free seasoning, free cooking oil, and free flavor enhancement all in one. Some grandmothers kept their grease for months, adding to it continually, the older layers adding depth to newer additions. Kids learned that wasting bacon grease was like throwing money directly into the trash. You just didn't do it. 5. Shopping at the Benkin store. Many black neighborhoods had discount groceries or salvage stores where damaged packaging meant dramatic savings. Black grandmothers knew these stores intimately, where to find canned goods with dented sides but perfectly fine contents, cereal boxes that were crushed but still sealed, and products near their expiration dates sold at 70% off. They understood that a dented can of green beans was just as nutritious as a pristine one, and they had the knowledge to identify which damages were cosmetic versus which might indicate spoilage. These shopping trips required skill and attention. Grandmothers would inspect each can carefully, checking for leaks or bulging that might indicate problems, but otherwise filling their carts with significant savings. A grocery budget that might buy $20 of regular price goods could stretch to $40 or $50 at the Benkin store. This was smart shopping, not desperation. It was understanding that companies charged premium prices for perfect appearances, and that families ate the contents, not the packaging. 6. Making Kool-Aid last for days. A single packet of Kool-Aid that was supposed to make 2 quarts of drink would somehow last a week in a black grandmother's house. The secret was in the stretching, adding extra water and extra sugar until that one packet flavored an entire pitcher that got refilled multiple times. The drink would get progressively lighter in color and flavor, but kids drank it happily. Especially on hot summer days when any cold, sweet drink felt like luxury. Some grandmothers became so skilled at this that they could make the flavor imperceptible to children who never knew what properly mixed Kool-Aid tasted like. They would add a little extra sugar to compensate for the dilution, making the drink sweet enough to satisfy, even if the cherry or grape flavor was barely present. This was never called watering down. It was called making it last, and it represented the difference between having something to drink or having only tap water for days. 7. Buying the whole chicken and butchering it themselves. While grocery stores charged premium prices for pre-cut chicken parts, black grandmothers bought whole chickens for significantly less money and butchered them at home. Armed with a sharp knife and decades of experience, they would break down that chicken in minutes, separating the breasts, thighs, drumsticks, and wings, then using the back, neck, and giblets for stock or stew. Nothing was wasted, not even the fat, which was rendered like the bacon grease. This practice required skill that was passed down through generations. Young girls would watch their grandmothers and mothers, learning where to cut, how to separate joints, and which parts were best for frying versus baking versus boiling. Buying whole chickens saved at least 30 to 40% compared to pre-cut parts, and that savings added up quickly for families who ate chicken weekly. The practice also ensured better quality control. Grandmothers could see exactly what they were getting. 8. Growing vegetables in every available space. Black grandmothers didn't need acres of farmland to grow food. They planted tomatoes in buckets on the back porch, green beans along the fence line, collard greens in a small backyard patch, and herbs and coffee cans on the windowsill. Even in urban apartments, grandmothers found ways to grow something. A pepper plant in a sunny window, green onions regrowing in a jar of water on the counter, sweet potato vines providing greens for cooking. These small gardens provided free, fresh vegetables that supplemented purchased groceries. A single tomato plant could produce dozens of tomatoes over summer, and those tomatoes went into salads, sandwiches, sauces, and were canned for winter use. Collard greens growing in the yard meant free vegetables for months, needing only water and occasional attention. This was not hobby gardening, it was food security, reducing grocery bills while providing nutrition that might otherwise be unaffordable. 9. Making one meatloaf feed 8 people. The meatloaf that emerged from a black grandmother's oven could feed a crowd. even when it started with just 1 pound of ground beef. The secret was in the extenders, breadcrumbs or crushed crackers, diced onions and peppers, and sometimes oatmeal, all mixed in to bulk up the meat without diluting the flavor. Some grandmothers added a beaten egg or two, a little milk, and generous seasoning to keep everything moist and flavorful. The result was a large loaf that sliced into 8 or 10 portions instead of the 4 or 5 that plain meat would yield. This technique came from necessity, but became tradition. The extended meatloaf was actually more flavorful and moist than all meat versions, and it taught children that more expensive didn't always mean better. Served with mashed potatoes, gravy made from the drippings, and a vegetable. This meal could feed a family of 6 or 7 for less than $3 in the 1970s. Leftovers made excellent sandwiches the next day, further stretching the value. 10. Saving vegetable scraps for stock. Nothing went into the trash in a black grandmother's kitchen without first being evaluated for usefulness. Onion skins, celery tops, carrot peels, chicken bones, ham hocks after the meat was eaten. All of these went into a freezer bag or pot for making stock. Once enough scraps accumulated, grandmothers would simmer them for hours, creating rich, flavorful stock that became the base for soups, gravies, rice dishes, and sauces. This free ingredient added depth and nutrition to countless meals. This practice represented an old-world wisdom about using everything the earth provided. While grocery stores sold canned broths and bouillon cubes, black grandmothers knew that homemade stock was not only free, but also more nutritious and flavorful. The gelatin from bones provided health benefits, and the vegetable scraps concentrated their flavors into liquid gold. Kids watching their grandmothers might not have understood the chemistry, but they understood that nothing was wasted, and that patience turned garbage into treasure. 11. Buying generic and store-brand everything. Long before store brands became trendy, black grandmothers were filling their carts with generic products in plain packaging. They understood that paying extra for name brands meant paying for advertising and fancy labels, not better quality. The store-brand corn flakes tasted the same as Kellogg's. The generic peanut butter was just as nutritious as Jif, and the plain-wrapped pasta cooked up identically to Prince or Mueller's. This required confidence and knowledge that came from experience. Some grandmothers would taste test generic products to ensure quality before committing, but once they found equivalence, they remained loyal to the savings. In some categories, they knew which generics were actually identical products made in the same factories as name brands, just packaged differently. The money saved on every shopping trip added up to significant monthly savings that could cover other necessities or even small luxuries. 12. Making stretch rice and pasta dishes. Rice and pasta became the foundation for feeding large families on small budgets in black grandmothers' kitchens. A 2-pound bag of rice costing less than $1 could create dozens of meals when combined creatively with whatever else was available. Grandmothers made Spanish rice with a can of tomato sauce and leftover vegetables, red beans and rice with a ham hock, or fried rice with day-old rice, a scrambled egg, and frozen mixed vegetables. Pasta worked similarly. A box of elbow macaroni stretched with canned tomatoes and ground beef became goulash that fed 6 people. Mixed with canned tuna, mayonnaise, and pickle relish, it became tuna macaroni salad for summer dinners. These starches were cheap, filling, and versatile, able to absorb and carry flavors from expensive ingredients, making a little meat or seasoning go far. Kids might not have known they were eating budget meals. They just knew grandma's rice dishes were delicious. 13. Using powdered milk to stretch fresh milk. Fresh milk was expensive, especially for large families. So many black grandmothers kept boxes of powdered milk in the pantry. They would mix it according to package directions, but then combine it with fresh milk in varying ratios to make the fresh milk last longer. Half fresh, half reconstituted powdered milk in the refrigerator pitcher tasted similar enough to full fresh milk that kids barely noticed, especially when used in cereal or for drinking with meals. Some grandmothers used powdered milk exclusively for cooking and baking, saving the fresh milk for drinking. In recipes for mashed potatoes, pancakes, cornbread, or puddings, The powdered milk worked perfectly and cost a fraction of the price. This strategy could effectively double the milk supply on the same budget, ensuring that children got necessary calcium and nutrition even when money was extremely tight. The practice was common enough that many black families considered it completely normal. 14. Shopping at the meat market on discount days. Black grandmothers knew exactly which days their local butcher or meat market discounted meat that was approaching its sell-by date. They would arrive early on those mornings, getting first choice of perfectly good meat marked down 30 to 50%, simply because it needed to be sold quickly. They brought coolers or insulated bags to ensure the meat stayed cold on the trip home, and they either cooked it that day or immediately froze it for later use. This required planning and knowledge of food safety. But grandmothers had both. They understood that meat didn't instantly spoil at its sell-by date, and that proper storage and cooking eliminated any concerns. A roast marked down to half price could be pot roasted immediately, feeding the family for days and creating leftovers for sandwiches. Chicken marked down could be fried, baked, or boiled for soup. These discount shopping days sometimes saved families $10 or $15 per trip, money that could buy vegetables, bread, or other necessities. 15. Making desserts from scratch instead of buying. While store-bought cookies, cakes, and pies cost money that could be used elsewhere, black grandmothers made desserts from basic ingredients that cost pennies. A homemade pound cake required flour, sugar, eggs, butter, and milk, ingredients they already had on hand for other cooking. Sweet potato pies used sweet potatoes they grew themselves or bought cheaply in season. Bread pudding transformed stale bread and a few eggs into a beloved dessert. These homemade desserts often tasted better than store-bought alternatives and became signature dishes that grandchildren requested for decades. The time investment was significant, but the financial savings were substantial. A homemade cake cost perhaps 75 cents in ingredients versus $3 or $4 for a store-bought equivalent. More importantly, the skills passed to children and grandchildren, ensuring the next generation could also provide affordable treats for their families. 16. Preserving and canning everything in season. When fruits and vegetables were in season and prices dropped, black grandmothers bought in bulk and spent weekends canning and preserving. Tomatoes were canned as sauce, whole, or as juice. Peaches became preserves. Green beans were canned in mason jars. Cucumbers became pickles. These preserved foods provided vegetables and fruits throughout the winter and into the following spring when fresh produce was expensive or unavailable. The initial investment in mason jars, lids, and a pressure can was significant, but it paid for itself within a season or two. A bushel of tomatoes purchased at peak season for a few dollars could provide tomato products for an entire year. The work was intensive. Hot kitchens, hours of preparation, sterilizing jars, processing in boiling water. But the payoff was enormous. Pantries lined with home canned goods represented food security and independence from grocery store prices. 17. Using every part of the greens. While some cooks discarded collard green stems as too tough, black grandmothers used them in creative ways. The tender parts near the leaves were chopped and cooked with the greens themselves. The tougher lower stems were saved and added to stock pots or slow cooked with ham hocks until they softened. Some grandmothers pickled the stems like they would pickle green beans, creating a tangy side dish that lasted for weeks. This practice extended to all greens: turnip greens, mustard greens, kale. Even the roots of turnips were utilized, not discarded. This approach came from agricultural traditions where families grew their own food, and wasting any part of a plant was unthinkable. When you've tended a garden through heat and drought, you don't throw away anything edible. This mindset carried into grocery shopping, where purchasing greens meant using 100% of what you bought. 18. Make a leftover gumbo or everything soup. Toward the end of the week, black grandmothers would create legendary soups and stews from all the odds and ends in the refrigerator. That bit of roast chicken, the cup of leftover rice, the few green beans from Tuesday's dinner, the half can of tomatoes, the lonely carrot, everything went into a pot with stock, seasonings, and creativity. The result was gumbo or vegetable soup that was never the same twice, but always delicious and filling. This approach ensured that no food was wasted while creating satisfying meals from what others might consider insufficient ingredients. Kids never knew they were eating leftovers because the soup was presented as a complete new meal, often with fresh cornbread to round it out. The technique required skill, knowing which flavors work together, how to balance textures, when to add what ingredient. But experienced grandmothers made it look effortless. 19. Buying large cuts and dividing at home. Instead of buying individual steaks or chops, Black grandmothers often purchased larger, cheaper cuts of meat and divided them at home. A whole pork shoulder cost significantly less per pound than pre-cut pork chops. And with a sharp knife, it could be transformed into roasts, cubed meat for stew, and even bone for stock. A beef chuck roast could be sliced into steaks or cubed for pot roast, depending on needs. This practice required butchering knowledge and confidence with a knife, skills many grandmothers learned from their own mothers or grandmothers. The savings were substantial, sometimes 50% less than buying pre-cut portions. Additionally, controlling the cutting meant controlling portion sizes and ensuring no waste. Families got exactly what they needed in the sizes they wanted, and the grandmother maintained quality control over every piece. 20. Trading and sharing with neighbors. Black grandmothers participated in informal community economies where neighbors traded ingredients, shared bulk purchases, and helped each other stretch budgets. If one grandmother found chicken on sale, she might buy extra and share with a neighbor who would reciprocate when she found a deal on vegetables. Others organized informal buying co-ops, pooling money to purchase large quantities of staples like flour, sugar, or rice at wholesale prices, then dividing them among participating families. This practice built community bonds while providing economic benefits. It was not charity. It was mutual aid and collective survival. Everyone contributed something, whether money, time, or resources, and everyone benefited. These networks ensured that families didn't go hungry even during the hardest times, and they taught children about cooperation, sharing, and the strength that came from community solidarity. 21. Soaking beans overnight instead of buying canned. Dried beans cost a fraction of what canned beans did, but they required planning and patience. Black grandmothers mastered the process, soaking beans overnight, then cooking them slowly until tender, seasoned with ham hocks, onions, and spices. A 1-pound bag of dried pinto beans costing 50 cents could create multiple meals, whereas the same amount of canned beans would cost 3 or 4 times as much. This practice connected to cultural foodways where dried beans, peas, and legumes were dietary staples. Red beans and rice, black-eyed peas, lima beans, navy beans for baked beans, all started from dried form in grandmother's kitchens. The cooking liquid itself became pot liquor, a nutritious, flavorful broth that was sopped up with cornbread. Kids learned patience and planning from watching these slow-cooked meals, understanding that the best food took time. 22. Making homemade biscuits instead of buying bread. Black grandmothers could make a pan of biscuits from flour, shortening, buttermilk, and baking powder for pennies, whereas a loaf of bread cost $1 or more. These biscuits, served hot from the oven, became the foundation for breakfast with eggs or sausage gravy, accompaniments to dinner, or vehicles for leftover meat and gravy the next day. The skill to make perfect biscuits, light, fluffy, with crispy edges, was a point of pride. The economics were clear. 5 pounds of flour, a can of shortening, and a quart of buttermilk could make dozens of biscuits over several weeks, costing far less than equivalent store-bought bread. Moreover, homemade biscuits tasted better and provided a sense of care and effort that packaged bread never could. Many grandchildren remember those biscuits as the ultimate comfort food, worth far more than their minimal cost. 23. Using oxtails, neck bones, and cheap cuts. While mainstream American cooking largely ignored certain cuts of meat, Black grandmothers knew that oxtails, neck bones, ham hocks, pig feet, and chitlins were not only affordable but delicious when properly prepared. These cuts required long, slow cooking to break down tough connective tissue, but the result was rich, deeply flavored meat and incredible broth. An oxtail stew could feed a family for less than the cost of a few hamburgers. This knowledge came from West African foodways and Southern agricultural traditions, where every part of the animal was used and valued. These cuts were cheaper precisely because they required skill and time to prepare properly, advantages that grandmothers possessed in abundance. What was dismissed as poverty food by some was actually sophisticated cooking, creating restaurant-quality flavor on a poverty budget. Today, these same cuts are trendy and expensive, but grandmothers knew their value decades ago. 24. Making sun tea instead of buying drinks. On hot summer days, Black grandmothers would fill a clear glass jar with water, add a few tea bags, and set it in the sun for several hours. The result was sun tea, a refreshing, naturally brewed beverage that cost almost nothing, sweetened with sugar and sometimes stretched with extra water. It provided a cool drink for the whole family without the expense of sodas or store-bought juice. This simple practice represented the grandmother's ability to create something from almost nothing. A box of tea bags costing less than $1 could make dozens of jars of tea throughout the summer. Kids would drink it by the glassful, never realizing they were participating in an economic strategy. Some grandmothers added lemon or mint from their windowsill gardens, elevating the simple tea into something special. 25. Teaching children not to waste anything. Perhaps the most important way Black grandmothers stretched $1 was by teaching the next generation these same skills and values. Kids learned to finish every bite on their plates, to drink all the milk in their cereal bowl, to appreciate food and understand its value. They watched their grandmothers transform seemingly nothing into abundance, and they learned that creativity, hard work, and knowledge were more valuable than money in the bank. These lessons created generations of resourceful, capable adults who could navigate financial hardship without losing dignity or joy. Grandchildren learned to see possibility instead of scarcity, to value quality and flavor over brand names, and to understand that love often showed itself through the effort of making something from very little. These kitchens were classrooms where the curriculum was survival resilience and the transformation of limitation into triumph.